of compassion blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Good morning and welcome to virtual Sunday worship with us at the First Parish in Framingham. I am the Reverend Aaron Stockwell, Senior Minister, and it is an honor and a joy to serve this congregation. And I am so glad that you are here this morning. Please do say hello in the chat if you haven't already.
And I am Rebecca Crawford, Director of Religious Exploration here at First Parish in Framingham. Today's service is intentionally multi-generational.
Unitarian Universalism is a faith for all souls. It doesn't matter your skin color, your age, where you came from, who you love, how you move around in this world.
What matters is that you are here watching this service, a part of this community. It matters that you use and you affirm and promote the worth and dignity of all individuals. It matters that you, dear one, are welcome here virtually, but into this very real community.
If this is your first time visiting us, welcome. We are so glad that you are here. Right below this video, there's a form that you can fill out to learn a little bit more information about us. Or you can send Sarah Morrison Neal, our office administrator and membership coordinator, an email at office@uuframingham.org.
Please reach out if you need anything at all, and reach out if you have a strength that calls you to offer them to this community. We, together, will help each other through.
If you're watching this service live on Sunday morning, immediately following the service will be our Zoom coffee hour. Everyone is so encouraged to join us. It would be so good to see your faces.
Love has held our congregation together since 1701, a love larger than any walls or any screens. And so welcome to First Parish in Framingham.
During these times of physical distancing where we must be apart, it is crucial that we have rituals that we do together. The lighting of the chalice or a candle is a Unitarian Universalist ritual. It can symbolize hope and truth. I recall these words I shared last week from Lois Van Leer. We light this chalice on the brink of a new year, letting go of what has been open and hopeful for what may come, renewed, restored, and ready to live life fully anew. May we move forward with attention. As I light the chalice in our sanctuary, and as the children of our congregation light their candles, I invite you too to perform the same or another ritual in your home. Once your flame is lit, I invite you to type into the chat, "The chalice is lit in our home," or "The chalice is lit in my home."
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung, through every land, by every tongue.
Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve all life with compassion, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. This is our great covenant, one with another and with our God.
From time to time in our lives, the news can be alarming. It takes over in some ways, doesn't it? And when you're a child, it can feel really scary. So I'd like to share a story with you today called Breaking News. It's not clear in the story what the event is, but I know when I was a child that I always felt as though I hadn't lived through anything really important yet. My parents would tell stories about news events that had shaped their lives, and I wondered to myself, will I ever see an event like that? Well, dear ones, as it happens, I have lived in my short years through many such an event, and you are living through one right now. And it can be difficult to know what to do at any age. So let's listen to this story together, and we'll reflect on it.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Lynn Rule, and I am an author.
One small child seeks to figure out how they can imagine a different world. She seeks in this story to see how she can impact not just her own immediate family and her classmates and her friends, but her entire neighborhood. And one can imagine that that neighborhood extends to her city, her state, her country, the entire world. And so I invite you to think a little bit as we are living through this incredible news cycle. How are you going to make a difference right here, right now, in your small corner of the world? What can you imagine? How can you think of a way to bring joy and laughter and spread peace and love in your home today?
Now is the time in our service that we set aside for the sharing of the things which weigh deepest on our hearts, because we know that sorrow shared is a burden lifted, and that joy shared can be joy expanded. There'll be prompts on the screen that give a little bit more order to our sharing. And do remember that in this public space, privacy cannot be guaranteed. So if there's something a little bit too tender that you think we need to know about still, do write me an email.
Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul. Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me, oh my soul. Stay with me, stay with me, stay with me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul.
Dear one, normally I invite you to take 3 comfortable breaths at the end of our time for meditation, contemplation, and prayer. But instead, we will also enter into this time with those 3 breaths as well. Our first breath is for our ancestors. Not just the ones that we are connected to by blood or family, but all those who have gone before us. Our second breath is for ourselves. Holding joy and hope, fear and despair, indifference and ambiguity. Our third breath is for the people who will look to us as ancestors. May we imagine and create a future worthy so that they will count us among their ancestors. O Spirit of life and love, who is imbued in our dreams and our possibilities, who is with us in our being and our becoming, named and unnamed, but who calls us by our true first name, which is beloved. In unprecedented times, I long for a crystal ball. I long to know the future. I long to know the outcome, the plot lines, the twists and the turns, the history as told in the textbook, but Spirit does not know the ending. May we be empowered to be prophets who reclaim the place of prophetic witness, not to see the future, but to see through the events of the current day and read between the lines and then move us to act accordingly. I give thanks for journalists and photographers who, when the United States Capitol was stormed on Wednesday, continued living into their vocation bravely, likely with fear, to record the events, recording the truths and the sights that feel shocking because they are shocking. I hope for their safety, though it seems odd. I pray too for the safety of our representatives and senators in Washington, D.C., and in our nation's state capitals too. I pray for our leaders. May they be safe. May they also remember their oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. For all those whom these events trigger memories of their own countries of birth and origin, may we heed their warning to us. May those people, it might even be you, have places to tend to the trauma that this event is bringing up. And may we find places too to share our joy and our gratitude for the people who make up our communities, for the animals in our life, for a love that is greater than all hate. We mourn those who have died, especially because of the coronavirus. 360,000. 4,000 a day. If this has affected us, may we mourn. If those deaths have not affected us directly, may we find ways to channel rage into action. Dear one, remember, there is no playbook or roadmap for how to feel in the days after an attempted coup. For most of us in the United States, we don't know. You are likely feeling so many different things, and those feelings are valid. In the days and weeks ahead, when the anxiety comes out sideways, may we have the grace and the gentleness with ourselves and others to say, I'm sorry. I'm having a tough time. Please forgive me. Remembering that while saying those words to others can be difficult, saying those words to ourselves can be incredibly challenging. May all that is holy hear these meditations. May it be so, and amen. Let us now sit in the quiet of our homes, remembering that the quiet can feel and sound different. As we come out of this time, let us take 3 comfortable breaths. A breath of gratitude for ourselves, a breath of gratitude for our families and our communities, and a final breath of gratitude for this world that we live in.
This morning's story is a story about imagination. Harold and the Purple Crayon by Crockett Johnson. One evening, after thinking it over for some time, Harold decided to go for a walk in the moonlight. There wasn't any moon, and so Harold needed a moon for walking in the moonlight, and he needed something to walk on. He made a long, straight path so that he wouldn't get lost, and he set off on his walk, taking his big purple crayon with him. But he didn't seem to be getting anywhere on the long, straight path. So he left the path for a short cut across the field, and the moon went with him. The shortcut led right to where Harold thought a forest ought to be. He didn't want to get lost in the woods, so he made a very small forest with just one tree in it. It turned out to be an apple tree. The apples would be very tasty, Harold thought, when they got red. So he put a frightening dragon under the tree to guard the apples. It was a terribly frightening dragon. It even frightened Harold. He backed away. His hand, holding the purple crayon, shook. Suddenly he realized what was happening. But by then, Harold was in over his head in an ocean. He came up thinking fast, and in no time he was climbing aboard a trim little boat. He quickly set sail, and the moon sailed along with him. After he had sailed long enough, Harold made land without making much trouble. He stepped ashore on the beach, wondering where he was. The sandy beach reminded Harold of picnics, and the thought of picnics made him hungry. So he laid out a nice, simple picnic lunch. There was nothing but pie. But there were all 9 kinds of pie that Harold liked best. When Harold finished his picnic, there was quite a lot left. He hated to see so much delicious pie go to waste. So Harold left a very hungry moose and a deserving porcupine to finish it up. And off he went, looking for a hill to climb to see where he was. Harold knew that the higher up he went, the farther he could see, so he decided to make the hill into a mountain. It went high enough, he thought, then he could see the window of his bedroom. He was tired, and he felt he ought to be getting to bed. He hoped he could see his bedroom window from the top of the mountain. But as he looked down over the other side, he slipped, and there wasn't any other side of the mountain. He was falling in thin air. But luckily, he kept his wits and his purple crayon. He made a balloon, and he grabbed onto it. And he made a basket under the balloon, big enough to stand in. He had a fine view from the balloon, but he couldn't see his window. He couldn't even see a house. So he made a house with windows. And he landed the balloon on the grass in the front yard. None of the windows was his window. He tried to think where his window ought to be. He made some more windows. He made a big building full of windows. He made lots of buildings full of windows. He made a whole city full of windows. But none of the windows was his window. He couldn't think where it might be. He decided to ask a policeman. The policeman pointed the way Harold was going anyway, but Harold thanked him. And he walked along with the moon, wishing he was in his room and in his bed. Then suddenly, Harold remembered. He remembered where his bedroom window was when there was a moon. It was always right around the moon. And then Harold made his bed. He got in, and he drew up the covers. The purple crayon dropped on the floor, and Harold dropped off to sleep. In our story, Harold's got a big old imagination, doesn't he? With his crayon, he's able to draw anything he can think of and interact with it. In fact, it's all because he wants to go for a walk in the moonlight that his story begins. I don't know if you noticed, but on every single page of this story, there's a moon, his guiding light. No matter where Harold went in the story, the moon followed him. His imagination would take over, and he could draw mountains, he could draw hot air balloons, he could draw porcupines and hungry moose, pies to eat. Sounds pretty fantastical, doesn't it? But whatever it is that Harold had in his head, he was able to put into action, sometimes by planning. Nice, straight, long lines in order to make a straight path so that he wouldn't get lost. And sometimes quite by accident, his hand shaking and creating an ocean. And other times right on the fly in order to save his very life, to create the hot air balloon or a little boat so that he wouldn't drown. The story is one of imagination, and there are so many people who have imagined great things for our nation. Things that never existed until they were able to put them into action simply by thinking them. I'd like to share a story of somebody else. Their name is not Harold, and they are alive today. And they may not have a purple crayon, but they do have an Excel spreadsheet. Their name is Stacy Abrams. She is a woman who lives in Georgia, and at the age of 18, she started to think to herself, What shall I do with my life? How can I imagine who I will become as I grow into an adult? And so she opened up her computer and she opened Excel and she created a grid. On each row, going down, she put the different jobs that she might like to have as a grown-up. And in each column, going across to the right, she started to list the skills that she would need in order to be that job. She had all sorts of ideas about who she could become as she grew up. She wanted to be a spy novelist writing stories about capers and intrigue. And so she wrote down the different skills that she would need for that job. In the end, she did publish some books, but it always wasn't a straight line as she imagined it might have been. As she continued to explore different avenues of her life, she decided to herself, just a few short years later, that she'd like to become president of the United States of America. As it happens, when she came up with that imagination, no one with Stacy's skin color had ever been president of the United States. She's a Black woman. And so she had to put in not just the skills, but the things that would need to happen in order for that plan to work. And she's still working on that plan. It hasn't always been a straight line. She's had some bumps in the road. She's had some losses along the path to where she would like to end up. But each and every single time, she talks about how she would like to imagine the next step. When asked about her Excel spreadsheet, she says, "That's just always the way my mind has worked, taking something that seems impossible or too big and then breaking it down into the pieces so that I know how to get there." Her ultimate goal when she was 18 was to solve poverty in the United States. She's not there yet, and she's certainly not alone in imagining such a nation. And she certainly has gained friends and perhaps some enemies as she has walked her path. 4 years ago, she lost the bid to become the governor of Georgia. But instead of whining about it, instead of being sad, she decided to get to work. She has since, along with the help of many friends and colleagues of hers, not just in Georgia, but across the country, she has recruited voters all across the state, people who had never voted before, people who thought that their vote perhaps did not quite count, or that it was maybe too difficult, or too many barriers were put in their way in order to make it happen. And over the last 4 years, even though she was not the governor, and even though she had lost, she has made great things happen in her state. More people have turned out to vote in Georgia than ever before. More people have turned out to vote, so much so that it came down to a runoff race for 2 senators. Those 2 senators won their seats on Wednesday, in part thanks to the work of Stacy Abrams and her allies. When asked about how she recruits voters and why she has taken the tactic that she does, she says, "It has to happen on a granular level by asking you what you need. How can I help you? What would change if your life could be made better?" And then trying to tie it back to politics and why it matters. You see, what she's doing is radical reach out. What she is doing is making politics work for the individual, because ultimately she knows that if she can imagine a nation, a country, a world where things work for the people, then she will have succeeded, and her Excel spreadsheet will have pushed her along the way. It may not be a purple crayon, and it may not be quite so fantastic as it was for Harold, but nonetheless, it's imagination at play.
My colleague, the Reverend Erica Hewitt, writes, "The offering that we take each Sunday isn't just a stale habit. It is an opportunity to recommit to this place and to this people. An offering is an affirmation, a yes. When we give, we say yes to something we value. With our gifts freely given, may we say yes to the values of our faith. May our offering help us practice Unitarian Universalism within and beyond our congregation as tools to empower our mission. May the offering be joyfully given and gratefully received.
Just across the sea on this world so round, the sun's shining hot right now. And even though this winter still surrounds this town, I can still feel that sun somehow. When I know that my sun will shine, just as sure as this world can spin, I can hold on fine, 'cause it's almost time for that sun to come around again. So I'll walk beside the sea on this frozen ground, where there once was a warm summer crowd. And even though that summer's been a long time gone, I can still feel that sun somehow. When I know that my sun will shine, just as sure as the world can spin, I can hold on fine, 'cause it's almost time for that sun to come around again. When your love grows cold and your heart grows dark, and the blame seems to fall on you, look how seasons must change, and don't think it's so strange when your love goes in circles too. And just know that your sun will shine, just as sure as this world can spin. We can hold on fine, 'cause it's almost time for that love to come around again. We can hold on fine, 'cause it's almost time for that love to come around again.
What is hope? It is a presentiment that imagination is more real and reality is less real than it looks. It is a hunch that the overwhelming brutality of facts that oppress and repress is not the last word. It is a suspicion that reality is more complex than realism wants us to believe, and that the frontiers of the possible are not determined by the limits of the actual, and that in a miraculous and unexpected way, life is preparing the creative events which will open the way to freedom and resurrection. The two, suffering and hope, live from each other. Suffering without hope produces resentment and despair. Hope without suffering creates illusions, naivete, and drunkenness. Let us plant dates even though those who plant them will never eat them. We must live by the love of what we will never see. This is the secret discipline. It is a refusal to let the creative act be dissolved in immediate sense experience, and a stubborn commitment to the future of our grandchildren. Such disciplined love is what has given prophets, revolutionaries, and saints the courage to die for the future they envisaged. They make their own bodies the seed of their highest hope.
Now, when Rebecca and I embarked on the planning for this Sunday, we were hoping for something a little bit more playful and celebratory, a happy and inspiring look at the uses of prophetic imagination. However, that is not exactly how this week ended up being. To tell you the truth, that really isn't exactly what the work of prophetic imagination is about. One of my colleagues wisely pointed out something that I mentioned in the prayer, that there isn't a playbook or a mental model that we have for what comes after the insurrection in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. So, dear one, feel the feelings that you need to feel because they're valid. And perhaps in moments of despair and confusion, that's when we can turn to our prophetic imagination. Because we know that all the concepts and things that exist in our world today, we know that they were once somebody else's imagination. I'll say this briefly, that we need prophetic imagination when things get tough and when we feel numb to the world around us. We use prophetic imagination to create a more just and loving world. And imagination is not just the realm of children and youth, it's for everyone. All right, we'll go deeper now. Walter Brueggemann, in his enduring classic, The Prophetic Imagination, writes that the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. Thus, he suggests that the prophetic ministry has to do not primarily with addressing specific public crises, but addressing in season and out of season the dominant crisis that is enduring and resilient, of having our alternative vocation co-opted and domesticated. It may be, of course, that this enduring crisis manifests itself in given time around concrete issues, but it concerns the enduring crisis that runs from concrete issue to concrete issue. Brueggemann believes that the work of prophetic ministry and prophetic imagination is the work of prophetic criticism and prophetic energizing. One without the other, however, is useless. If you critique something in this world, you must also have the energy to work to change it. The work here is to be done by artists. Brueggemann explains it this way, that the prophet engages in a futuring fantasy. The prophet does not ask if the vision can be implemented, for questions of implementation are no consequence until the vision is imagined. The imagination must come before the implementation. Our culture is competent to implement almost anything and to imagine almost nothing. The same royal consciousness, he writes, that makes it possible to implement anything and everything is the one that shrinks imagination, because imagination is a danger. Thus, every totalitarian regime is frightened of the artist. It is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing futures, alternative to the single one that the king wants to urge as the only one, the only thinkable one. We must use also a poetic imagination in order to be prophetic. But even that poetic imagination is just metaphor. Brueggemann does not mean that we sit down and write a sestina or a haiku or even a limerick and then read that to the formal or informal powers that be, and then our job is done. No, Brueggemann means that poetic imagination is the last way left in which to challenge and conflict the dominant reality. The dominant reality is necessarily in prose, but to create such poetry and lyrical thought requires more than skill in making rhymes. I am concerned, he writes, that I'm concerned not with the formal aspects of poetry, but with the substantial issues of alternative prospects that the imagined and managed prose, rather, around us cannot invent and does not want to permit. Such an activity requires that in the center of our persons and our communities, we have not fully embraced the consuming apathy espoused by the royal consciousness. In the midst of a traumatic event or prolonged trauma, we have a very human inclination toward numbness. Prophetic imagination works to reduce that numbness, which can be another challenge. It works to reduce it in three different ways. The first is to offer symbols that are adequate to confront the horror and massiveness of the experience that evokes numbness and requires denial, which means, Brueggemann explains, that the prophet is to reactivate out of our historical past symbols that have always been vehicles for redemptive honesty. The next step is to bring the public expression. Those very fears and terrors that have been denied so long and suppressed so deeply that we do not know that they are there. The public expression of fear and terror, of course, requires not analytic speech like what we're hearing right now, and not the language of coercion, but the language of metaphor, so that the expression can be touched at many points by different people. And the final step is this. Brueggemann writes, the prophet is to bring the public expression of dread, of endings. I believe that the proper idiom for the prophet is cutting through numbness and denial, and that's the language of grief. The rhetoric that engages the community in mourning for a funeral they do not want to admit, because it is indeed their own funeral. Okay, so yikes. We went deep quick. This is tough and challenging work to do. It is not the work of a casual faith. It is the work of a community committed to a steady and a sturdy faith. A faith that has its sleeves rolled up and its work boots ready to support the wearer. A faith with big balloon tires on its wheelchair. Dear ones, watching this homily, the work of prophetic imagination is actually easy. It is easy to imagine the world differently. It is doing the creation that is more challenging than creating a world with a purple crayon or an Excel spreadsheet. But in order to build the world that we dream about, we must start somewhere. And that involves dreaming and imagination. Let's start there, because otherwise we will not know the work that we need to do. May it be so, and amen. Friends, I send you forth out into the world with these words of benediction. As we hit pause on this YouTube video, as we close our browsers, may we take the light of love and take it out into the world and use it to brighten our own little corner of the world. And when we need to rest or recharge, be challenged or affirmed, may we once again be a part of this virtual but very real community. May we hold the light always, and the light hold us always. Amen, and go in peace. As we extinguish the flame of our chalice, and as we extinguish the flames in our own separate homes, I invite you to type into the chat box, I carry the flame, or we carry the flame.